Well, 2017 was a year, wasn't it? And for me, I tried to turn it into a journey of improving as a painter. So if you're going to sit through this with me, I'm going to go through a bunch of models that I've painted over the time, look at things that I've improved upon and techniques that I've learned. Disclaimer number one, what you're looking at right now, it's not me. I did not do that. That was an appearance at the Crystal Brush this year. A fantastic model, but I'm showing it here because that's the kind of inspiration and the aspiration that I would ideally like to get to in a few years. I spent the tail end of 2016 painting a dwarf army and also some Malifaux figures. So as we look through, this is the early stuff that I did at the beginning of 2017, so in January. There's nothing terribly remarkable about them comparatively to where I feel like I've plateaued in the past. And that's kind of what I wanted to explore into. I tried a few different things and challenges, like on this guy here. One of the challenges there was to use the whole spectrum. And I think it was done okay, but could have been done a little more subtly. But for the most part, it was Malifaux models that was getting painted. I did a few more things for the dwarfs as we led up to Adepticon. And I started to explore new metallic colors, and that was what that dwarf sort of launched into. Then we came to Adepticon. Now, leading up to Adepticon, I promised my pal Dallas that I would enter this bust, which I had done the first ever bust that I'd done right here, and enter it into the Crystal Brush competition, just to get some kind of feedback and critique and understand where I was at. This was a level-setting experience that was also at the same time very mind-blowing and expanding. To see all the talent that was on display there was nut bars. But while also at Adepticon, I took the opportunity to take two hobby classes, one related to sculpting and one related to painting. The painting one with Kirill Kanaev was the one that sort of opened my eyes a little bit more to transferring what we see in real life into miniature form and understanding light and shadow and that sort of thing. Also, in reviewing all the Crystal Brush entries, you could appreciate a lot more about the techniques used there, blending, pigmenting, adding texture, etc., etc. So that was essentially a breaking experience for me to go to Adepticon and learn that. So I came back home and started to try to apply those things. Doing some freehanding stuff was never terribly much of a challenge, but here's the one that was a big deal. The sketch technique. This is something that Matt DiPietro talks about. So maybe I should just pause for a moment and explain what I mean by that. So this model of Yamazuko was just done with a zenithal priming. But then the first thing you do before you lay color on it is you reinforce with a pure white and a pure black all the shadows and the highlight spots. Then the remainder is all painted only using glazes. With the exception of those tiger lilies that I put some more opaque paint on to make them show up a little bit more. But the lantern, the cloth, the hair, even the flesh was all done just by glazing rather than using a straight opaque paint. It's a way to do models a little bit more quickly, but still have that sort of transition of color from shadow to highlight within it. So it was useful to explore. After Adepticon, I played a dwarf army while I was there, so I got back into painting a few more dwarfs afterwards. And the only thing remarkable about these guys is I explored a little bit more with the metallics, just to be a little more directional about where I laid that for highlighting and shadowing. Pulled out an old model and dusted it off as well. But then we got into some real deals. Now, this is 75mm models that I bought while I was there, and I bought it for the sake of my sister's wedding, which was going to come up later in the year, and she was doing a steampunk theme to it. I thought this was the ideal characters to incorporate into that. What was great about this was a bigger scale allowed me to work a lot more on blending and textures throughout it. So that was very advantageous to do so. So working with skin tones and incorporating some shadows in there, some violet, some red, some blues, other colors that I either wouldn't use on 28mm. Also getting some textures into the leathers, which in these early shots look a little bit rough. but we're still there, and as well as the feathers. Again, lots of things you could do at 75 mil that you can't appreciate at the 28 mil scale. I was able to do within these ladies here. The wedding itself was a steampunk theme, so that's why all the cogs and that kind of stuff dressing up the base. These girls were done as wedding toppers for the cake. And the cake itself was a masterful piece, which I'll show you right here. This was done by a lady that lives about 100 miles away. Everything you see on that from top to bottom is edible, including the goggles and the keys and everything like that. And she even weathered it fantastically. So it was a real treat to have my piece sitting there on top of it, and it was really an honor to be part of that piece. And after that, back to Malifaux and exploring more of that sketch technique. So again, zenithal primer on this kind of stuff, mostly painted with only using washes and glazes to get these kinds of things done. I've really found that it was really helpful on big cloth surfaces and monochrome skin tones. So I got another crew done that way. And then we got back into some dwarfs. Nothing remarkable about this. Again, metallic textures, still learning those, getting into some more brass style of things, and then more sketch technique on the Malifaux models. They turned out to be the best of the things that I did to represent that. Now this, what you're looking at, is a competition piece that I did later in the year for a challenge that our PMP Google Plus community got into. If you're unfamiliar with the PMP, please do look it up. If you don't use Google Plus, you won't see it, but if you do, look it up, join us. It's a painters community where we, sort of share works, explore, challenge each other, and try to gain from each other's successes as we go through. So anyway, this was an out-of-the-box challenge. So my challenge here was to do something tech-related for the first time in probably a decade. Also in exploring non-metallic metals, so all of that chrome and silver stuff is just white and black shades. So that was the first exploration. Adding that sort of blowout of dirt was an experiment that, if you notice back from a minute ago, I tried to create some dusty mist on those that last Malifaux crew, and using the same kind of cotton painted, I tried to recreate that here. So that was fun to try, and it worked out for the most part okay. Then getting back into some more Malifaux models, and these were modeling challenges, these big spiders, because they were taking up so much space over the base and gangly and hard to handle. I don't think there's anything terribly remarkable to say about this batch, except for maybe a little bit of freehand attempts on this guy, as well as on Sun Quan, who's coming up here and doing the starscape pattern. But then getting into this bigger model, the Shadow Emissary, I tried to emulate some more light reflection on the scales. Now this was done not with any metallics, of course, and the kind of thing that I tried to do to reinforce that along the way was, when we go to look at the back of the scales, there is several segments that are sort of modulated, so they come and they go, where light catches and light fades. So I think that kind of sold the idea. It was an experiment. I probably could improve upon it if I was going to do it again, as of course you always can. But for the time being, it felt all right. Then we did some little tanuki, and the thing that was, I guess, an experiment on here was how to do liquid inside a jug. Nothing else on this model was really a challenge at all, but doing that was tough. As always with static things, it's tough to emulate, motion within a 3D model when you can only really do it on a 2D surface. Okay, then Shadespire appeared, and I tried some experimental stuff. I actually only really want to draw your attention to the lady on the left. What I tried to do is, again, more non-metallic metal stylings on there, as well as some red marbling. The metallic worked out okay, but the marbling not so good on this smaller scale. I think it works well on a bigger scale model, like those 75 mils, etc. But on this, there's just not enough surface area to make that match up right. Did some orcs as well, and the thing that we tried to do here was do the armor almost entirely with airbrush. It did require some touch-ups afterwards because I still need to get a whole lot better than I am at airbrush stuff. So that's going to come in the year of 2018 for sure. But they were okay and fun to do. Then in December, I did another painting challenge to do a crew box challenge. This was through the Weird Place, which is a Facebook community. And the idea was open a box, paint the whole box within the month of December, and here you go. This is what pretty much brought me towards the end of the year with Ulix and his pig boys. This was fun to do because there was a bunch of different textures. There's a lot of flesh, there's fur, there's a dog. I did this one to emulate my own beagle in some way. And I got some cool bases actually, again back to Adepticon. That's where most of these bases come from, with the tree roots on the bottom. So that was finally finding a use for those things I got there. Now there was enough time for one more challenge at the end of the season, and this is it right here. This guy is Aeonis. So he was done as part of another PMP hobby challenge that this theme was called All About That Base. And the idea was to try to create some kind of story with the base around your model. So Aeonis is a Time Lord on top of here. We did, obviously the craftsmanship of creating the base was the first thing, and coming up with the theme of this warped background landscape, because Aeonis is a Time Lord on this warped bending grandfather clock. I got into it a little bit more with doing some kind of starscape like I did on Sun Quan and a couple other models earlier. Some directional lighting on those time cogs as well. I'm trying to create a little bit of a copper feel with that thing that I think needs some improvement, but it was my first real go at that. The sculpting and shaping of all this kind of thing was fun to do, to create that background. There's more photos of this on the PMP community itself, but again, another good way to wrap up the end of the year with a bit of a challenge for myself. So always welcome for those, and I think there was some hobby growth throughout 2017, thankfully. So switching back to a model that is not by me, again, but to serve as some inspiration going ahead. Well, the things that I've learned in 2017 was a couple of new techniques, a couple of new thoughts and approaches, and a whole lot of inspiration about what could be done with a miniature. Exploring by doing different mediums like the scale busts and the 75mm scale stuff, and a couple of other things in between, doing dioramas and that sort of thing. I hadn't really explored a terrible amount before. So although I wouldn't say that my painting skills have gained a great deal in that 1 year, there certainly is some marked foundation for improvement. Now, going forward into 2018, of course, the kind of things that I want to specifically improve on is use of airbrush and the application of that in concert with my brush skills onto models. So I'm going to go to Las Vegas at the end of January for their LVO there, and I'm taking 3 different paint courses, one with Caleb Wissenbach, another with Matt DiPietro, and then also with Angel Heraldez over that weekend. And through that, I hope to come back with much better thoughts and approaches on use of airbrush, how to apply technique with that, adding texture, modulating the colors, and managing all that. So that's what my hope is, and there will certainly be many projects to do and display that through 2018. So I hope that goes well. For anybody that's listened to this far, it'd probably be worthwhile to get your thoughts and share what your hopes going forward are, what you and maybe also summarize what you learned in 2017 that you're going to build upon for the future, because we can all improve on the hobby. So come along with me. Let's all get rid of gray plastic models and make them beautiful.